Rajya Sabha, the upper house of Indian Parliament, is the highest theatre of legislation in India. The Secretary General is the administrative head of the Rajya Sabha Secretariat, which functions under overall direction of the chairman. Mr. P.C. Modi, a 1982 batch retired IRS officer and former chairman of the Central Board of Direct Taxes, assumed charge as the Secretary General of Rajya Sabha on 12th November 2021. Mr. Modi has almost 40 years of long experience of handling various posts in Government of India. He has deep insight into jurisprudence and exposure to judicial and quasi-judicial processes. During his tenure as Chairman CBDT, he encouraged and promoted extensive use of technology. This feat has been replicated in the upper house of Indian Parliament as well. Digitalization has taken Parliament to the doorsteps of the world at the click of a mouse, and at the same time taken Parliament and parliamentary activities closer to people. The Inter-Parliamentary Union is the global organization of national parliaments. What began in 1889 as a small group of parliamentarians dedicated to promoting peace through parliamentary diplomacy and dialogue has since grown into a truly global organization with 180 members and 15 associate members. The Secretary General, as the Chief Executive of the organization, manages the IPU and plays a critical role in defining and implementing the IPU's strategic direction. Mr. Martin Chungong made double history in 2014 by becoming the first African and first non-European to be elected as IPU Secretary General. He was elected to a third term of office, which began in July 2022. He has more than 4 decades of experience and knowledge of parliaments at national and international levels. He has dedicated his professional life to promoting and building democracy worldwide. After working for 14 years in Cameroonian Parliament, he spent more than 20 distinguished years within the IPU before being elected its Secretary General, the 8th person to hold this position. He has also built an impressive portfolio in the promotion of dialogue and conflict resolution, issues that remain at the heart of the IPU's global work. A very warm welcome, Mr. P.C. Modi, Secretary General Rajya Sabha, and joining us virtually from Geneva, Switzerland, Mr. Martin Chungong, Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. A very warm welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be with you today.
Pleasure is entirely ours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to a good conversation.
Likewise, sir. And setting the tone and tenor of this discussion, the slogan of IPU is for democracy, for everyone. And India, that is Bharat, is the mother of democracy. Democratic ethos are ingrained in India since the dawn of civilization. Sir, our bond is very special. So how do you look at the relationship between IPU and Indian Parliament?
I would say that India shortly is a very, very active and productive member of the IPU. They joined the IPU. India joined the IPU in 1949. So this year, you are celebrating your 75th anniversary of non-stop membership in the IPU. And over the years, we have seen a very robust participation of various Indian personalities, members of parliament, in the deliberations of the IPU. We have had the honor of having 2 presidents of the IPU coming from India, Shri Singh, I think that was back in the 70s, and of course Najma Heptullah, who became the first woman president of the IPU, a very prominent member of the Indian Parliament. Over and above these profiles, we also have India hosting many meetings of the IPU, the assemblies. I think we've had 2 assemblies in India since you joined the organization, and you have a host of other specialized meetings that have taken place in your very esteemed country. I want to point out that currently We have an Indian participating in the governance of the IPU, in the executive committee of the IPU, Mrs. Saranjit, and I salute her contribution to the deliberations of the organization. So in short, you are a very strong member of this organization, the Global Organization of Parliaments, the Inter-Parliamentary Union, which, as you said, was created 135 years ago in 1889 on the premise that dialogue, discussion around a table was important to settle differences, and that you did not need to go to war, to resort to violence in order to resolve your differences. And so we see that transpiring throughout the history of the IPU, and we are glad that India has been part of that discussion. You mentioned the issue of democracy for everyone. It is very important that the Global Organization of Parliaments, that brings together 180 parliaments from across the world, can mobilize these parliaments to ensure that whatever decisions are taken by Parliament in the context of democracy benefit every single individual and not just a handful. So I want to salute the active participation of India in the IPU, and I hope that we can continue this very fruitful cooperation for the good of humanity.
Well, absolutely, sir. Point well taken. Mr. Modi, we're talking about India's participation at the global stage. By any yardstick, India's G20 presidency will stand out, and it will be considered outstanding in the history of this preeminent global forum for economic and financial governance. In fact, P20 as well. The P20 summit that was hosted by India was stupendous, where parliamentarians from across the world resolved to make effective and meaningful parliamentary contribution. So how do you think India is leveraging parliamentary diplomacy to shape a more meaningful, more stable, and more peaceful world order?
Thank you, Kriti. From times immemorial, India has believed in the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, a platform where we consider the entire world as one big family. And time and again, in all our participations in the multilateral or bilateral forums, India has tried to promote this concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is treating the world as one big family. The Parliament in particular has been an active participant in the multilateral forums like the IPU, like the CPA, or the BRICS Parliamentary Forum, and such other organizations. Bilaterally also, we have engaged with the other parliaments by having the parliamentary friendship groups, the regular exchanges between different parliaments. What do these visits entail? They are primarily experience sharing experiences and also trying to build upon the best practices which are observed across different parliaments. The inclusive approach which India adopts was very ably demonstrated during the presidency of G20 and the organization of the Presiding Officers Conference, that is P20. Especially notable was the fact that at the end of the conference, there was a unanimous adoption of the declaration, which shows that India has always believed in a consensual approach, an approach which kind of takes the entire family to be one, and so promote that goodwill and harmony throughout the world.
Right, sir. And since we're talking about the importance of parliamentary diplomacy, Mr. Chungong, parliamentary diplomacy is an instrument of dialogue between different parliaments of the world, which has gained paramount importance in recent years.
How do you distinguish between parliamentary diplomacy and traditional state diplomacy, and why is it imperative in this current political and global landscape?
Thank you for that question. I just want to clarify at the outset that parliamentary diplomacy is not meant to compete with traditional forms of state diplomacy. It is very clear in our minds, in the minds of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, that in international law, the entity that is entrusted with the powers to enter into commitments internationally between states and among states is the executive arm of government. So that's very clear to us. But we think that parliamentary diplomacy can be complementary, must be complementary to the traditional forms of diplomacy, and for several reasons. First of all, when the ambassadors or ministers come together, they speak, they say, on behalf of India, on behalf of my state. They don't say on behalf of the people of India. But when parliamentarians do meet, they speak as representatives of the people. They bring the voices of the constituents to the global deliberations. And in this way, the outcomes of international deliberations are more reflective of the popular needs and interests of the people. That is why we think it is important for parliaments to come together. And then parliaments can play a strong role in fostering an atmosphere of trust between countries that can be conducive to more peaceful and harmonious relations between states. And that is what the IPU has been doing. It is the foundational vision of the organization, bringing people together to dialogue, to iron out their differences around the table instead of going to war. And over the years, we have seen several manifestations of this in the IPU. We have established formal mechanisms for conflict settlement, for dialogue between conflict-riven countries. We have the recent task force for Ukraine that we established, and apparently that is the only real mechanism today in the world, if you may say so, that has engagement by Russia and Ukraine with a view to resolving the conflict in Russia, in Ukraine. We have a standing mechanism on the Middle East questions where, again, we have the presence of Palestinians and Israelis, and together we have a dialogue on issues that are standing in the way of peace in the region. So we have several manifestations of this at the multilateral level, I want to say. But at the bilateral level, it's also important. We see the in the IPU that when you had the war in the Falklands, Malvinas, the first opportunity for the Argentinians and the Brits to meet was at the IPU. The initial contacts between the two sides during the war and after the war took place in the IPU. And this led to further discussions that contributed to easing tension between the two countries. Currently, we are involved in consultations and mediation between Armenia and Azerbaijan at the level of parliament in order to support the ongoing peace process in the South Caucasus. So we have these examples that are out there that portray the importance of parliamentary diplomacy that is based on dialogue, equity, based on the interest of the people as articulated by the representatives of the people. Parliamentary diplomacy that is intended to support the traditional form of diplomacy. And don't forget, when our ministers and ambassadors and heads of state adopt international decisions, it is parliaments that need to implement those decisions, to ratify them, to provide the budgets and hold government to account. So it is important that the parliaments be involved in conversations at the global level. It is no longer, I think, tenable that parliaments be excluded from the diplomacy at the international level.
Well, precisely, sir. There's explicit complementarity between parliamentary diplomacy and traditional state diplomacy. But, Mr. Modi, there's a very important component of parliamentary diplomacy, that is parliamentary exchange. Tell us about the importance of parliamentary exchanges and parliamentary visits, and how do they fortify India's diplomatic ties with other nations?
I may mention that carrying the point made by Martin further, that these are not two competing or conflicting features. The normal diplomacy at the state level and the parliamentary diplomacy are both complementary and support each other. So far as these exchanges are concerned, let us also understand that the parliamentarians world over are the embodiment of the people's will, and what they echo in multilateral and bilateral forums is the will of the people. To my mind, the first thing which it contributes is these such exchanges is the people to people contact through their representatives. And once that is established, the trust and the confidence between two nations or multiple nations increases manifold. It also helps in building up the cultural ties, the economic ties, the social ties between different nations. Furthermore, if we analyze it further, from parliamentary diplomacy may be a small microcosm of the extended diplomacy at the state level, but it also, such kind of an exchanges also promote the sharing of best practices within the parliamentary jurisdictions. All parliaments face different kinds of problems. Learning from each other's experience is definitely a rewarding experience. Engagement at multilateral forums like IPU, the CPA, have also been very rewarding in as much as global issues like climate change and the likes, getting to hear the views of different parliamentarians on that, a consensus can be built which can ultimately help in the betterment of the nations and the humanity as a whole.
Well, sir, you made a very pertinent point that Parliament is the embodiment of will of people. Mr. Chungong, parliamentarians are uniquely placed to influence the government as well as the public opinion. How do we make parliamentary diplomacy more people-centric?
Yeah, well, I just want to concur with what Mr. Modi, my colleague, was saying earlier. It is important that Parliament be the embodiment of the will of the people. They have to mirror the interests and aspirations of the people, because in every constitutional dispensation around the world, parliaments, I don't hesitate to say this, parliaments are the most representative institutions. They are the result of the will of the people through the ballot. So I think that it is very important that they are prominent in deliberations that are intended to improve on the will of the people. And if we take the Sustainable Development Goals that are the global blueprint for lifting humanity out of poverty, for ensuring that everyone on this earth can live in a peaceful world that is free from hunger, disease, and all of that. I think that parliaments play a strong role there because they cannot leave anyone behind. They are duty bound not to leave anyone behind. They need to reflect the views of all. So the voice of the people is there. And I believe in this capacity, parliaments then are the ones that can bring the P, that is people, capital P, to global deliberations because they represent the people. This is very important. If international deliberations are divorced from the real aspirations of the people, from the real interests of the people, then parliaments are failing. And so we want again to stress that parliaments should be part of the conversation, but I think that they cannot be the sole participants in this conversation. You need the government, of course, you need a civil society, you need academia, the media, and all those stakeholders that have been excluded from the global conversation. I think it is important to bring them back. It is important that we do this ecosystem approach, because then, as to answer your question, it is only then that parliaments can reflect the will of the people in diplomacy, because Parliament would have heard the voices of all other relevant stakeholders out there and can reflect these in the policies that they adopt in Parliament, the laws, the budgets that they put in place that are meant to serve the common will, the holding of government or oversight of government over government is very important in this regard. So I think, again, cut it short, parliaments are the embodiment of the people, and they have to be seen to be the embodiment of the people in whatever decisions they are taking, the policies, the laws, the budgets, and the representational activities that they carry out on behalf of the people.
Well, ultimately, it's all about articulation of aspirations of people. But another important component of parliamentary diplomacy, Mr. Modi, is capacity building. How is Parliament of India enhancing the capacity of parliamentarians to engage effectively in parliamentary diplomacy, particularly in increasingly globalized world?
Let me start with the point that if we see historically, parliamentary diplomacy was not in the, what should I say, in the consideration of the parliamentarians as a discipline in itself. But over the years, with the increasing engagement of the parliamentarians at the multilateral forums and at the bilateral level in the goodwill or the parliamentary friendship group visits, a need was felt that the parliamentarians need to be exposed to this facet of diplomacy as well. So to begin with, when the members of parliament, when they are elected afresh, right from that time, the engagement starts. In so much as in the orientation program which we hold for the parliamentarians, there is a specific session devoted to parliamentary diplomacy to make the members of parliament aware of their responsibilities at the international level. Apart from this, we also have regular briefing sessions which we have with the Ministry of External Affairs before the visits undertaken by the parliamentarians across the globe, so that they are exposed to the facts, figures, the issues at the multilateral level and at bilateral level as well. In addition to that, we have a in-house research division which kind of supplements the briefing session given by the Ministry of External Affairs by providing the honorable members with extensive notes and research material on the agenda items of that particular visit or an exchange, which enables them to engage with their counterparts more effectively. And while selecting the people for the visits which take place, an effort is also made and a conscious consideration is made of the fact that if we can have domain experts amongst the parliamentarians who can contribute more effectively to the agenda and to the discussions which take place during such visits.
Right, sir. And before we wrap up this session, two quick questions on gender parity and technology. Mr. Chungong, we understand that you're the chair of the board on International Champions for Gender Justice. So tell us more about the work being done to promote gender parity.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very quickly, before I answer that question, let me commend the Indian Parliament on its very robust capacity building program, which is open to parliaments of other parts of the world, I imagine, and this has been going on. It aligns very well with the IPU's own vision. We cannot assume that all parliaments have the capacity and skills to perform the duties that are incumbent upon them. We need to help them. We need to provide capacity building for them to be up to speed to deliver. Coming to their question regarding gender equality, I'm honored to chair the Global Board of International Gender Champions, which is a network of leaders, global leaders, members, leaders of international organizations, including the Secretary General of the United Nations, the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, ambassadors, prominent members of civil society who are dedicated to promoting gender equality in their spheres of influence. We premise our work on the fact that we need to be walking the talk. We need to be doing what we preach. And this can help, I believe, trickle down to the grassroots. So we have two pledges. We have one to promote gender parity in deliberations. For instance, when you are invited to a panel, you want to make sure that those panels are gender balanced. The perception there is very important because we see that men and women are deliberating together. The other one is to fight something that we have seen to be constituting a barrier to women's rights, and that is gender-based violence. So those are the two pledges that we are working robustly to implement in the International Gender Champions. And this complements what the IPU is doing. Let me turn to my hat as Secretary General of the IPU. We have over the years promoted gender equality as a key prerequisite for genuine democracy. You cannot have democracy when women are excluded from the deliberations. And so we have worked over the years to ensure women's political representation. We track women's political representation in parliaments around the world. We promote their rights in terms of fighting gender-based violence, for instance. And let me just give you some statistics, which are not very encouraging. Currently, we have just slightly over 1/4 of the world's MPs that are women, 27%, if I'm not mistaken. And I was looking at India's own record on this. I saw that in the Lok Sabha, only 13%, 13.7% of the MPs are women, and the Rajya Sabha is slightly better, 16.7%. So one might say that India is still under the global average of 27%. But having said that, I do understand that steps have been taken to promote greater women's participation in parliamentary processes. I do understand that a bill has been adopted reserving 1/3 of the seats in parliament for women. And I salute this. I think that it is important that we go ahead and promote robust implementation of this salutary measure. And I hope that when next we have this conversation, when next the new parliament is in place, I will see more female-based figures around the table. I also want to stress the point about sexism and violence against women in politics. This is something that is emerging strongly and is discouraging women from entering the political sphere. So we need to work together to fight this, to make Parliament a safe environment. We make parliaments gender sensitive so that women feel comfortable working in such an environment and can contribute in a very productive manner. So, in short, our goal is to bring more women into the conversation. And when they are within that conversation, they are given responsibilities that allow them to contribute effectively to the deliberations, enrich those deliberations, and in this way, they can also help implement the outcomes. But for that to happen, we need to provide a safe environment. We need to fight sexism, sexual harassment, which is too prevalent across the world. It's not endemic to a particular region, it's across the world. Women parliamentarians and parliamentary staff have reported having been harassed one way or the other, and quite often very violently, and this is not acceptable. Thank you very much.
Very thoughtful, sir. And before we wrap up this session, Mr. Modi, parliamentary diplomacy is also going and becoming more digital as other realms of life. How is Parliament of India leveraging technology for greater global engagement?
The Parliament of India has embraced technology in the right earnest has embraced technology in the right earnest, in as much as we are well on our way to make not exactly a paperless parliament, but a less paper parliament. And that very theme resonates through our engagements at the international level, which is demonstrated by the fact that we have attended the international exchange through virtual conferences, by attending online surveys like the one which Martin just mentioned about sexism and harassment of women at workplace. We also have bilateral talks amongst the nations on a digital platform. Another very interesting facet which has just taken place is that we have conducted a study of bicameralism in parliaments across the world, and the result of that has been shared with practically all the parliamentary jurisdictions through digital medium. I'm sure that the parliaments across the world would further enrich this area by sharing their best practices through digital medium, whereby the parliaments across the world can improve their efficiency as well as their effectiveness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Let's open the floor for quick questions, please. Please go ahead, sir.
To SG-IPU, can you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Because Secretary General Rajya Sabha, Mr. Modi mentioned a very valid point, which can be a challenge, is that when the parliamentarian contests elections, then diplomacy is really not on his radar. Another problem is that every 5 years you may get, a different delegation composition. So how do you counter these challenges, or how do you manage them?
Yeah, thank you. Can I answer that question? I think that it's important that we view diplomacy as a long-term endeavor, parliamentary diplomacy as a long-term endeavor. And that is why we have been very stringent in encouraging parliaments that are members of the IPU to institute mechanisms at the institutional level, so that irrespective of who is there at the time, you'll have a continued engagement. So in India, it would be the Indian Parliament that is the member of the IPU, irrespective of who is sitting in those seats in the Parliament. Instead of saying, okay, we identify 2 or 3 people to be the members of the Indian delegation to the IPU. So this is important. I recognize the fact about the constant renewal of Parliament. That is, I think, very essential, inherent in every democratic dispensation, that the people have the opportunity to change their leaders when they're not happy. That's fine, and that means that we have to be doing capacity building, as has been explained, on a regular basis, providing information at the institutional level, and that's what we do at the IPU. Providing information at the institutional level, developing tools that will build Parliament's capacities that can stand the test of time. That is, a handbook you produce for parliamentarians would serve the current crop of parliamentarians in India, but it will serve a future crop of parliamentarians. But I agree that it's a big challenge, having to keep a pace with these changes in membership of parliament around the world. But it's very important. But let me just use this opportunity to talk about digitalization. It is something that is important. It's emerging strongly on the international scene. The emergence of digital technology has benefits. Certainly, it has proven to have benefits, but it also has the potential to disrupt society. And we do think that parliaments should be robust in regulating the development of digital technology. At the IPU, we have created the Center for Innovation in Parliament, which is supposed to help parliaments build their capacities, acquire knowledge, as Mr. Modi was saying, on technological developments and seeing how those elements can be harnessed into the parliamentary processes. But also, the IPU, as the global organization of parliaments, is working to create global tools that can help parliaments regulate the emergence of technology such as artificial intelligence. And we're going to be adopting a charter of ethics of technology and science next month in the IPU, which is the work that we've been doing over the past 2-3 years to develop a framework that can help parliaments take into account the ethical dilemmas of technology and see how this can be factored into legislation, budgetary allocations, and all the like. We are also very keen, and this is happening in October too, during our assembly. We are going to adopt a resolution on the effects of artificial intelligence on democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Here again, we want to equip parliaments with a framework for dealing with those dilemmas that are emerging that could be disruptive for society, and see how parliaments can be at the forefront of developing frameworks that help us to create and use artificial intelligence in a beneficial way. So I just want to say that this is something that is on our radar screen. It is important for us together, and I would like to encourage the Indian Parliament to bring its expertise to the table. I'm very glad Mr. Modi mentioned the very good point of exchange of experiences. Thank you.
I have a question from SG-IPU. Sir, I have a question. Basically, we are celebrating a conclave for 3 years of Sansad TV. So I have a question. What role a public broadcaster like Sansad TV can play in international democracy and peace?
I think it is important. One of the hallmarks of democratic parliaments, of any democracy, is transparency and accountability. And the media, including traditional media such as Sansad TV, have a key and critical role to play to bring parliamentary processes to the living rooms of citizens around the world, for citizens to understand what their leaders are up to, and also spur interest in providing inputs into the deliberations of the deliberative bodies of democracy in any country. And this is, I think, very important. Today, Sansad TV's reach is not only India. The evidence is that I'm sitting here in Geneva and we're having this conversation that is being live streamed across the world. So the global community is much more educated on the processes that are taking place in India through Sansad TV. So we encourage countries to establish such mechanisms that are intended to promote transparency in the deliberations of institutions of democracy and governance in their countries. So Sansad TV, let me use this opportunity to congratulate you on the excellent work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, sir. That means a lot to us. Your insights have been truly invaluable for us. Please accept our deepest gratitude. We hope that our dialogue continues in future as well. On that note, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Martin Chungong, Secretary General IPU, Mr. PC Modi, Secretary General Rajya Sabha, and Mr. Rajat Punani, Secretary Rajya Sabha and CEO Sansad TV.
To watch more programs of Sansad TV, subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to like and share them.